Hey YouTube, it's Dimitri, and today we're going to talk about something, a little bit of a rant here. We're going to talk about economics as a whole because of a few different things that have kind of compiled over the years, so it's not just one event here, but a few different things that have compiled over the years and really a lack of understanding of economics. It's just frustrating. Um, so a really common question I get is, and I'll say question here, some people just belligerently make statements because they're uneducated and don't understand basic economics, but I make videos, for example, on gold and silver. I made one video, right? That's it, just one video. But in the past, I've hinted that my political views are libertarian. So I'm not liberal, I'm not conservative, I'm libertarian. So to maximize freedoms, which is kind of an interesting thing because you sit between the two parties. So I think a lot of people say like, I'm kind of in the center. I'm not conservative. I'm not liberal. A lot of times you're probably libertarian, but you just don't know what that is, right? It's just not a common thing. But the goal is to maximize freedoms. There are a lot of misconceptions around this. People think you're an anarchist, right? You don't like government. You're going to get rid of all governments. Okay, this is not true at all. This is not true at all. There are many things, for example, like the legal system that can't be privatized. You need a legal system to do it. The founding fathers of the United States, most of these people actually relied on libertarian views and perspectives. The United States itself is not a democracy. I cannot emphasize that enough. People think since we vote, we're a democracy, right? That's a democratic process. I understand that. That's how that works. We have a democratic process in there. The United States is a republic. So in the Pledge of Allegiance, you know, that we were all taught in school and we've delusionally forgotten and not stated probably because schools are somewhat anti-American these days. It states in there, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. The United States is a republic, okay? What that means is that you try to build laws that support freedom, that support everybody, and specifically it provides freedoms to those that are the minorities, even if it inconveniences the majority, right? As long as it maximizes freedoms for all. So that's a really important aspect to talk about. So why am I talking about this in the sense of economics here? And it's because I've debated with people, I've been emailing people, people have been asking questions. People don't understand, you can't separate politics, ethics, and morals from economics. I don't understand why people don't get this. I'll give you an example here. Got a whole stack of books so we can show you guys some stuff. So first off, Plato's Republic is on my to-read list, okay? This is on politics, okay? This is a very old book written by Plato. It's on politics, but it also applies to economics. So this is on my reading list because of that. If you look at a lot of books, they're economic and public policy books. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that. Economics and public policy. It's another textbook. Something else I like to point out to people, because most people don't read that much, or they don't do their research in economics. The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. Probably one of the greatest books. So yes, I've read this book many times, as you can see. It's a little bit tattered here. This is the original text in like British English from 1776. This is not the abridged version. This is not the shortened, the idiot version. This is actual text from Adam Smith, okay? Everyone knows this book is an economics book. It is the foundation of all economics. Every piece of economics, no matter your school of thought, no matter your training, your education, it hinges and depends on these principles and theories. And yes, you're going to just disagree with different parts of this, okay? Which we're going to get into in a second, but this is the core of economics. The book that most of you also don't know, which I've also been reading and I've read in the past, is The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So this talks about morals and doing the right thing and ethics and how you structure a society, okay? So we'll put these books aside for now. I also read Sigmund Freud. I also read Carl Jung. I don't have a book here with me, but I read psychology, okay? So why am I telling you this? Why does this make any sense? Is there any other book in here I can pull up and show you now? So I got a lot of books here, okay? The reason being is that economics as a whole is studying how the economy works, and the economy only functions based on morals and ethics of a society and a culture. Okay, so I believe there are fundamental laws, which we'll talk about a little bit later, like supply and demand, depending how you model these. There are fundamental laws that will come out as essentially like de facto things that just function. This is just how the world works, okay? But these things are so complicated, it makes sense to make simple models. But these models are not always correct. I think Adam Smith has done the best out of everybody in making something meaningful that you can extract this knowledge out of. And most other economists that have invented things, it's actually in Adam Smith's book. But again, they just extracted excess information and just drew their own conclusions from what was already provided. So he's not the end-all be-all. We're going to get into that. But economics as a whole depends on your political views. It is why it is so hard. You cannot separate, for example, communism and Marxism. Okay? The fundamental theories and beliefs that underlie communism underlie Marxism. So these things are bound together. So when I talk about being a libertarian, right, you don't always have to say that, okay, I am a Marxist, but I don't believe in communism, right? There might be things inside of there you disagree with, right? And I'm going to put this out here in general. People that subscribe to one train of thought, one school of training, one school of education, and they're so stupid that they put their blinders on and they only listen to people in their field, in their view, are people that are lacking any intelligence, okay? Please do not follow them. Do not listen to them. You'll see in a lot of my things I talk about Austrian economics, right? I mention it loosely. I'm not here to indoctrinate you. I'm not here to force you to learn things. But you need to look at everything. You need to learn everything, and you need to try to pull together your own picture of the world, okay? Don't just listen to what people tell you and be brainwashed, right? You're just a fool at that point. But my point being is you can't separate politics and economics. And so one of the key functional components of Austrian economics is that it's more or less a capital free market ideology or an idea, right? It's something that you think about, you believe in, and you think that people should make free decisions on their own and should not be coerced into it. Now, again, that idea as a whole is not Austrian specific. That divides out different schools of economic thought. That divides out different schools of morals and ethics and standards and things. So you can't just bucket and say all people in here believe this. But when you look at this, right, you want to look at a system from its core theology. What is the underlying principles inside of these economic theories and ideas? And I think this is super crucial, and this is where people are misunderstanding this. I recently had somebody say that like Marxism is hand-waving. There's no math or models involved. In Austrian economics, there's no models or math involved in that either. They just make things up. Like, have you ever read a book? Have you ever went to school? Did you ever look at all these ideologies and theories? Of course, they did not. They did not do their research. They have not read all these books. So I have not read the Communist Manifesto. I have not read Keynesian's books, for example. They're on my list. I would like to read them, right? I don't agree with them. I don't even agree with the morals and the standards and the ethics that underlie their teachings and beliefs. But you cannot go out and tell people what you do believe if you don't understand what you don't believe. Okay, and that is a crucial point here. So going into the models question, it is very common for people to say, Dimitri, Austrian economics, they don't believe in math or models. They just make things up. Okay. Well, the reason your teachers are telling this is because your teachers lack education, and you probably go to a really crappy economics school, to be quite frank with you. So I went to University of Michigan for my master's in applied economics. It is taught fairly classical or neoclassical economics. There are some Keynesians involved as well, and they teach the Keynesian ideas. We don't get taught Marxism, of course. But again, they don't go out and just bash other schools of economics purely for the sense of doing it. And what you don't realize is a lot of students that go to these big schools come from other countries. They're actually going to be Marxist, and there's going to be Keynesian, there's going to be classical, and there's going to be Austrian. There's going to be all kinds of people. You have to teach the fundamentals and the foundations. And so to debunk this, just as one example here, is that where do you think marginal utility came from? Right? Was there a classical economist that thought of this? Well, if you actually look this up here, so do a little bit of searching on the internet. I'll put some links below. Friedrich von Wieser, so born July 10th, 1851 in Vienna, Austria. So he's actually an Austrian economist. Was one of the first people to come up with this idea of marginal utility. Okay, So when you learn the basics of supply and demand, for some reason I've been getting people that think supply and demand is a classic economics thing and nobody else believes in it. It's just supply and demand, and all these models in math, they're only in the classical view. And somehow Keynesians also have math and models, but nobody else has models. Okay, well, let me just debunk this in another sense. Chinese people use far more math than Americans and Europeans, okay? Just hate to burst your bubble here. And South Americans and everyone else. The Chinese do a lot in math. And I've actually worked with a colleague of mine who came from China, who had an economics PhD. She was very smart and very bright, but she was a Marxist. And many of her ideas didn't align with my ideas, right? That's okay. We can still learn to work together. We can still discuss and debate and have intellectual conversations. Again, they use a lot of math to define why they do things and how you do them. Again, Austrian economics, marginal utility, one of the key defining characteristics in supply and demand. So again, classical economists believe that you have this short-term dynamic and supply and demand is purely based on, supply and demand of how many goods you have versus the demand you have. And they oversimplify the idea to the sense that you just draw these lines on a chart and bam, you have supply and demand. If you want to get more complicated, you create them as curves and you add it to a diagram, right? That's supply and demand. Well, a lot of people have similar beliefs. So Austrian economists believe that it's defined also by the marginal utility. So again, marginal utility is taught in economic schools all over the world. This isn't a groundbreaking idea. This isn't an Austrian-only idea, right? As an economic community, we should all be striving to learn and explore and try to figure out what works and what doesn't work, okay? So again, this is not a Austrian-only, right? Classical economists also believe in marginal utility. But the difference is Austrian economists believe that there are other components that affect supply and demand. For example, individual preferences and utility, right? Utility is happiness. The fact that you have an idea of utility, which is happiness, people have tried to measure. I think this is quite silly, right? You can create models for it, sure. But every individual is so unique, it's hard to measure that. And I'm going to give you guys an example here. So we've talked about gold and silver on my other video, and people are like, Dimitri, you shouldn't buy it. This is a dumb idea, right? All it is this basic value. Okay, well, if you look at it in the last few years, it's outperformed stocks. Surprise, right? It's also something that retains value, and I want to talk about an interesting problem here. So Adam Smith had this problem called the diamond water paradox, and he was unable to solve it. Okay, so Smith noted that even though life cannot exist without water and can easily exist without diamonds, diamonds are, pound for pound, vastly more valuable than water. The marginal utility theory of value resolves the paradox. Okay, so marginal utility theory is an Austrian economics idea. I know, mind blown. They have a model and a theory, and there's math involved. But it resolves the paradox. Water in total is much more valuable than diamonds in total because the first few units of water are necessary for life itself. But because water is plentiful and diamonds are scarce, the marginal value of a pound of diamonds exceeds the marginal value of a pound of water. The idea that value derives from utility contradicted Karl Marx's labor theory of value. So again, this Austrian economics idea is laying out that it is different from Marxism. So it's trying to draw lines on where things are similar and where things are different. Karl Marx's labor theory of value, which held that an item's value derives from the labor used to produce it and not from its ability to satisfy human wants, okay? So this example, this paradox that Adam Smith struggled to solve is solvable by this concept and theory and idea of marginal utility. Now, for those of you that don't know, just get onto the Google machine here and type in marginal utility models. You can see people have tried to measure it. They've tried to model it. There's all kinds of math applied to it. And this is where I'm going to kind of wrap some of this into what's going on here, which is if you have a theory, just because you can apply math to it does not mean it's correct. And why this is true, so we're going to reference some more books here. Models Behaving Badly by Emmanuel Derman. So this is a book about quants. The Black Swan by Nissim Taleb points out other issues with models and how people are delusioned by models in the industry that are working at massive banks, economics firms, Federal Reserves. They're delusioned a lot of times and they follow these models incorrectly. And what ends up happening is you're overconfident in these models, right? You believe the model, okay? Economics is a soft social science. There's no hard science. So I can define things like books and weight and atoms. And I can study the physics behind like gravity that affects the book. And you can think about the real world as mathematical, right? It's the language of science, right? But it's not. It's the language of hard science. We can't measure humans' decisions and abilities and thinking processes, and people seem very irrational. That's a whole other concept in economics, right? We assume people are rational. But that's a very big assumption. There are a lot of assumptions behind that, right? I mean, are everyone going to select something that maximizes their return? No, we've kind of thrown that out the window in general in economics. So a lot of times we look at it and say, okay, it'll maximize your utility. And a lot of times you can tie utility to return. So it kind of holds your ideology together for some reason. But utility, again, their happiness from this is going to be different from person to person. And just as an example here, as a segue, I have a silver coin. This is a Liberty dollar. It's a silver American Eagle. And this coin was purchased for $10. Okay? I would not sell this coin to you for $1,000. There's nothing rare about this coin. It's a standard coin, but it has a year of 1988. Okay? This coin is super rare because this is the only coin that my father gave to me, and it has my birth date on it, which is 1988, right? The actual value of this coin to me as an individual is not going to follow supply and demand. And you can say I'm a fool, I'm illogical, I don't make sense, but I am part of society, and there are many people out there that have things like this that have other values, like sentimental value that is tied to it, okay? Here is the exact same coin, okay? This is the same coin, but this is a 2000. I would sell this to you for, I don't know, 30 something dollars. That's basically what I paid for it in today's market. So again, supply and demand is on here. But the marginal utility, this coin, I cannot get another one of these that has the same sentimental value to me, okay? So when you look at models, one of the criticisms that Austrian economists have, so looking at this from a big point, is you should not use models to manipulate people in general. So this is not all Austrian economists that believe this, but this is one of the core principles here, is that you should not central plan. No central planning. So you would go, of course I believe that, right? I don't like Marxists. I don't like Keynesians. We shouldn't social plan, okay? Well, the Federal Reserve of the United States, again, a lot of these are ran by classic or neoclassic economists. They're central planned. You're fudging with money supply. You're fudging with fiscal policy, so adjusting taxes on the fiscal side, all right? Trying to force people to give you more money or try to give them less or more money back, or you're screwing with that. Or on the other side, you're screwing with the money supply. So you print money, you get rid of money, which again is why a lot of these have more value because you can't print them, right? It costs labor and other economic principles to get these things. But again, the issue here is that central planning from a fundamental perspective is not always good, okay? And it causes a lot of issues. Now again, coming from that libertarian perspective, coming from the Austrian economics view, right? There are things that the government has to do. You have to have a government. Government has to enforce laws. You need a legal system. There are some goods that you just can't produce with the private sector. So you don't say that, okay, we only get rid of all the government or anarchists, right? You still need fundamental concepts. But when you look at the school of thought, right, you can look at all these examples of central planning, and it seems from historic events, the less central planning you have, the better. One of the reasons for this, and again, this is a criticism from Jordan Peterson as well, so not even an economist, but someone that studies psychology and sociology and whatnot, is that really smart people tend to be Marxists because they feel like they are so smart they can make the best decisions for everybody. And one of the issues with this is when you get higher up in educational systems, you have a group of people around you that are all the same. You're all like-minded, okay? Especially in these economic schools, right? They're think tanks, you're just echo chambers. You're just hearing yourself talk basically over and over again. And one of the issues with this is that you're not going to get new ideas. You're not going to see how other people think and live. And I've even mentioned how some of my friends live. So I didn't grow up in a super wealthy, high class, super educated, area. And when I talk to people from other high class, rich, educated areas where I've essentially attended and gone through, they can't understand the other side. They don't understand other people in different areas of life. And when you go on YouTube, you find some crazy channels. Like I accidentally stumble upon, people that are living, a girl that's living in the mountains, just building her own cabin. Most people aren't going to want that, right? Most people are going to assume you're going to want a really stable job. You're going to want a husband. You're going to want to make all this money. You're going to want, a house with a white picket fence. You're going to want the American dream. Okay, everybody wants different things. And so when you get super smart, you think think here, put it in air quotes, you're not really thinking. You think you can tell other people how to live their lives and make them happiest, and you're going to try to coerce them to do that. Okay. Now, a lot of classical economists and other people in the United States believe you can nudge people into doing this, right? There's a whole book called Nudge. It's how do you incentivize people to do things like save more money, right? We all agree we should all have retirement, and therefore we should all do it. But it doesn't consider what those funds, the opportunity cost associated with those funds, is reducing from people's lives. Some people might not want to save for retirement. Some people know they're going to die at a young age. All their families died at a young age. They smoke, they do drugs, right? They want to use their money for drugs and things that make them happy, right? Again, how do you maximize people's freedoms? How do you tell them what they should and shouldn't do, right? You shouldn't do it. You shouldn't be dictating what people do and don't do. You shouldn't be telling them, I have some model that optimizes it. Okay, so this is where Austrian economists get this tag of we don't believe in models and we don't use models. And these people that say this is because you've probably never actually read a book from Austrian economics. You've never Googled Austrian economic models, right? There's models out there. There's ideas, there's principles. Everything that we do, so again, I'll show you some more books here. So there's a book on mathematics for economics, right? A lot of this applies to classical economics. A lot of this applies to Keynesian economics. It applies to Austrian economics. It applies to Marxism, right? You can use math to describe anything, but it doesn't mean it's the truth. It's not a hard science, right? There's no equation for supply and demand. And this is where a lot of quants will subscribe to different economic schools of thought. And so I hear constantly, well, Paul Samuelson was super famous, for being like a classical economist or a Keynesian economist, or, people start throwing things out there and they say, oh, so therefore, all quants should go about this route. Or, these quants came up with a model, so therefore all quants believe in models, you're not an Austrian economist. One of the ideologies and ideas here, which I'll put out here, is business cycles aren't taught in schools anymore. So I don't know about you, maybe they're taught at your school. Most universities in the United States don't teach business cycles. They've been debunked. Again, here is a book on business cycles and equilibrium by Fisher Black. Now, I'm not saying necessarily he's an Austrian economist, but what I'm saying is some of his ideas come from Austrian economics, right? Some of his ideas could also be said to be Keynesian, okay? But again, you have to tear these ideas apart and look at the fundamental mechanics. And you have to realize all economics starts on a level playing field. And they all have these ideologies and these politics that back them. And a lot of them want to change the way that governments work and how you set up policy. So even Austrian economics, right, economists and all that, they want to put in policies and rules that prevent you from restricting other people's freedoms. They also want to put laws and rules in place that guarantee safety and ownership of goods, right? These are important laws and characteristics, again, of Austrian economists in classic and neoclassical economics, and even, somewhat perhaps Keynesian economics, but not Marxist. So again, you need to dive deep into the fundamentals and really understand economics from the ground up. And again, I have more books here. So again, one of my favorite books is an Austrian economics book. It's The Road to Serfdom. My other favorite book is Animal Farm, which is by George Orwell, right? Many of you probably don't realize it. That's an Austrian economics book that has those same ideologies and the same backings behind it. But again, I read other things. I read Milton Friedman's book, Capitalism and Freedom. He has many good ideas. He's a pretty smart man. But again, you don't have to believe everything somebody says just because you subscribe to some school of thought. And again, I just have other economics books I've read here. So macroeconomics for today, intermediate macroeconomics, and economic growth. Again, you can use models to describe anything, but you shouldn't overly rely on models. And one of the criticisms Austrian economists have on models is that people build these overly simplistic models, then they build policy on them, and they use that to coerce people into doing things or preventing people from doing things, or all these different things that they manipulate, and they try to force people or create laws that prevent you from doing things. Right? You have all these different angles in it, and it's all based on a model. And what Austrian economists are saying is correct, right? So I believe this is your equation, and you state it to me, and I say, okay, that's fine. And you look at the residuals, the errors, and applied to real data, they're not unbiased, right? They're not blue. Best linear unbiased estimates for linear models. So what that's saying is there's something missing. You have missing variable bias. You're missing this in the end. And so quants here, now relating this back to quant finance, quants will actually build very unique specific models to a very unique specific set of data. So when you look at models, for example, let's say I work in credit, credit risk, which is what I do, the model that we will build a lot of times will have a similar structure to other models. So it's like an economic theory, right? You have an economic model for supply and demand. But all the variables that go in, the model structure itself can be vastly different. And many times for specific models, you can even change the modeling type and structure. It hasn't been done in the industry. It's completely different and it works far better. Now, again, there is no model. You can't write an equation on a board and say, this is how you model the probability of default, and there's an equation, and you magically just plug variables in. That structure will change for every single product in one bank. Now you look across banks, every different bank has all these different models. And I always hear people say, well, Dimitri, okay, the Black-Scholes model is a model, okay. Well, in practice, nobody blindly takes the Black-Scholes model, or at least you shouldn't. So again, going back to all those models behaving badly in the Black Swan book and other books out there as well, you shouldn't just take the Black-Scholes model and you say you price something. This is the equation, this is a model. Right? Nobody's doing this that's actually making money with these, especially if you work on the financial engineering side, right? You're engineering financial products. You have to look at the model, you see there's all these assumptions behind it, and they're wrong. And now there's no closed form solution. So the Black-Scholes model, again, let's look at this, was derived off of the CAPM. Again, it goes back to that theory. You have to have the theory. You have to devise the theory first before you can apply the math. And even if you apply the math, it doesn't mean it's correct. So the Black-Scholes is amazing because it's a closed form solution to derivative pricing, and you can adjust it for American options, but it's mainly derived and designed for European option pricing. As soon as you want to price those in the real world, you start looking at things like volatility. Volatility is not constant. It changes over time. You have to model these. There's stochastic processes. What if your underlying asset for a derivative doesn't follow Brownian motion? It's not stationary, right? Then what do? This is the real world, right? You can't just write an equation out, plug a bunch of crap in and believe it. So quants that are very advanced, that are matured through their careers, so again, like Emmanuel Derman's book on models behaving badly, you start to understand that you have to fine tune and adjust things. And models in finance, so finance is like economics, it's a social science, it's not a hard science. You have to predict things and you have to adjust them, and you really need to state what your weaknesses are in the model up front. Don't sweep them under the rug and pretend they don't exist. You need to understand the weaknesses and realize models don't tell you how the world works. They're only approximations for how we think it works and how we think we want to interact with it. So again, creating policy and economic nonsense and forcing people to do things and creating ridiculous rules are things that go against Austrian economics and libertarian political views here. This is why I hold them, okay? This does not mean I don't believe in models. It doesn't mean I don't develop models, right? I use models as a guide and a tool. But as a risk manager, someone who actually develops models or validates models or implements models, you need to understand your weaknesses. You need to understand where you're wrong. And so to wrap this whole video up here, I hope you guys understand economics is very complicated. Very complicated. You need to read hundreds of books to get there. I haven't even read hundreds of books on economics, right? Textbooks, all these books I'm reading here, it's not even close to 100 books. You need to read all these books. You need to read more books and more books. You need to talk to people and debate them and argue with them and figure out what you really believe based on the data and the facts and the things that you can see. And you can take an analytical, scientific approach to it. But again, just because you're taking a scientific approach does not mean it is a hard science. You should not blindly believe in models. And I have people, go against me and say, Dimitri, classical economists, neoclassical Keynesian, they don't believe the model is correct. They're just using it. Okay, well, if you didn't believe your model was correct or at least fairly accurate, you wouldn't implement it into policy. And that's the goal of these models the majority of the time. So anyways, just my wrap up here, my rant here on economics. Economics is very interesting. I might teach more on this channel. I don't know if I have time to do it on here. We have so much other stuff to cover, but I appreciate you guys watching, subscribing. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. And as always, until next time.